Welcome to Keeping It Green, a podcast for ornamental plant professionals and enthusiasts with hosts Tim Abbey and Tom Butzler.
Hello, welcome to Keeping It Green, a podcast from Penn State Extension for ornamental plant professionals and enthusiasts. I'm one of your hosts, Tim Abbey. I'm a horticulture educator with Penn State Extension, and each episode I'll be joined by one of my colleagues on the green industry team as a co-host. On today's episode, my co-host is Tom Butzler. Hey, Tom, how are you?
Hey, Tim, doing pretty good today.
On today's episode, we'll be joined by Claudia West from Phyto Studio. But before we get onto our interview with Claudia, we'll start out with a quick check-in and about what we are seeing out in the field. Tom, since we don't have any other co-hosts, it's going to default right to you. So what's been happening?
The beginning part of the summer was hot and dry. Things were really starting to look pretty shabby out there. But the past several weeks, we've got plenty of rain and everything looks good. I also work with the vegetable industry, and unfortunately, all this rain has been a little a negative. The disease issues in some of the vegetable fields are really starting to flare up. Downy mildew's on the move. Phytophthora is taking out some pumpkin fields. So it's a little more concerning, I think, on the vegetable side of things, but the ornamental side of things, it's looking pretty good. Hey, I got to tell you, Tim, one thing I did do last year was collect a bunch of redbud seed, the dried pods that hang off there. And I had a whole garbage bag full of them, and I put them in some of these large plantings and covered them with a little bit of peat moss. And I probably have a good 300 plus redbud seedlings that are about 4 inches high right now. So, next time I see you, I'll hand off a couple redbud seedlings to you.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that's a cool plant. We have one actually at my house that when I moved in, it was only probably about 4 inches tall, and I just relocated it. And now it's like this year, it's taller than me. It's probably like 7 feet tall now. So that's cool.
Doesn't flower right away. Is yours flowering now?
It flowered this year.
Okay.
Yep. Not as spectacularly as like some of the wild ones or even like ones in the landscape, but it actually did put on some flowers this year and look really nice.
So what are you seeing down in the eastern part of the state?
About the same as you, I guess. I mean, I don't do as much work with the vegetable growers, but yeah, definitely with the humid and wet weather we're having, unfortunately, they're dealing with issues. Ornamentals, nothing really concerning as far as anybody getting in touch with me or what I've seen. However, 2 weeks ago, I think a little over 2 weeks ago, there were actually a couple of tornadoes in southern York County.
Oh,
like my base county. I think they were like F1s. They weren't like obviously some of the really catastrophic ones, but they did cause some crop damage. Blew the roof off a couple of like garages, like work areas and things like that. So luckily, it as far as I know, nobody got hurt. With like trees falling down or anything. But that was a little unique. Yeah, it's kind of.
If anything, on the positive side, I guess it keeps the arborists busy and moving them out.
Definitely, a couple. I've been in touch with a couple of them in York County, and they've got plenty of work now.
Yep.
Cleaning up. Well, great. So we'll get going here with the sort of the focus of our presentation here today, which is Claudia West is going to join us today from Phyto Studio. Claudia has a master's in landscape architecture and regional planning from Technical University of Munich. She was the ecological sales rep from North Creek Nurseries, based in Pennsylvania from 2010 to 2017. And now she is a co-owner, and correct me if I'm wrong, Claudia, of Phyto Studio, who does a lot of work with ecological horticulture. So welcome to the Keeping It Green podcast.
Thanks for having me, Tim and Tom. I appreciate it. Excited to be on your program.
It's good to see you. We haven't seen each other in a couple of years.
I know. It's been too long.
So we'll start out with a basic question. Who are you and how did you get here?
Oh, a long story. In a nutshell, I am a German plant nerd who came to the United States because you just have such an amazing diversity of plants here. I think that's really one of the driving motivations that bought me that first plane ticket to the United States. As some of you may know, a lot of Europeans are just desperately in love for American native plants. In fact, many American native plants were cultivated in Europe long before they became, considered garden worthy here in the United States. Species selections like Rudbeckia goldstorm or Echinacea magnus, they come from Europe. So I was always like, this weird nerdy kid, wondering where all of these amazing plants came from. And planting and land management that kind of runs in the family. As soon as the wall fell, I grew up in Eastern Germany. My parents started a small landscape design build firm. My mom a florist business. So I was raised in that, designing, installing, maintaining gardens ecosystem, and through that, really developed a pretty early interest in love for plants, especially American plants. And it was the connection to the late landscape architect Wolfgang Oehme. Through him, a really good friend, who are both from the same town in Germany, I was able to secure an internship at Blue Mount Nurseries. I don't know if you remember that, one of the 3Bs in Baltimore, one of the first nurseries, perennial nurseries here in the United States. And that was really right out of high school where I got to this amazing opportunity, not only to learn more about Wolfgang Oehme's work and shadow him, but also to learn more about the ecologies here in the United States. And I simply got hooked. So in a nutshell, that's where I came from. And I realized that the diversity here is so mind-boggling that I think it takes at least several lifetimes to really learn and understand these species.
Definitely.
Oh, oh, go ahead, Tim.
Sorry, Tom. This is my own ignorance with sort of like the European market as far as ornamentals. So is there, like in Germany and some of the other countries, is there a desire for, or has it increased demand for like the native plants to those countries, kind of like what we've seen here in the US in the last, say, 20 years, where people want like native, American plants?
Absolutely. We definitely see more language coming out of these markets asking for native species. But it's also a little bit of a tricky topic for us with our history, as you all know. So this pure focus on where a plant comes from is problematic for many reasons. So there's this one layer to it, and the other layer is that just like in other parts of the world, conditions are changing rapidly. The weather conditions are, getting a lot drier. Europe is again experiencing, and many of you may have followed that in the news, very hot or very wet or very dry weather patterns. So many of the what we call natives are often, stretched too far beyond their natural adaptations. So there's also, a willingness to search in other parts of the world for more adapted species to these new kinds of conditions that, European gardeners are dealing with, just like here in the United States. It's a global phenomenon. So it's, trying to find the right balance, and the discussions are happening all over the world. And honestly, even in German forestry, a lot of folks are looking to American native species, tree species now that, because of their adaptations to drier summers, may actually be more suitable to a central German ecosystem than some of the species that evolved there. So it's an interesting new world and reality. And right now, I think just like here in the United States, folks are trying to sort out what is the most ethical path through this. Yeah.
So, besides native plants, how do the Germans or Europeans view horticulture, like the design, the concept compared to Americans? Is it the same, similar, or is there some major differences?
I think it's similar, but also very different. Most European gardeners have a fraction of the land that American gardeners have. So very often, people live in much more urban kind of conditions where just most folks live in apartments. And the folks who do have smaller gardens, usually on a much smaller footprint than we see here in the typical American garden. So because of that, changes the whole design and level of input that folks provide into their gardens. And the folks who don't have these smaller gardens often have allotment gardens that are either near train tracks or just outside the city in these bigger spaces where that's a huge part of German culture, for example. So because of that, you don't really see these kind of vast expanses of mods that you see here. A lot of it has to do with it's just a completely different settlement structure, and the fact that most towns and cities, if not all of them, have master plans that control growth and control and shape where people garden in.
From going, from your initial interest in like just, native plants of the United States over the course of your career, or I guess what influenced you also to really go way beyond that into like the ecological horticulture? The plants are, really like the cornerstone for a healthy ecosystem wherever that might be, because they're food source for so many different animals. Was there like a class that you had in college, or?
Oh, quite the opposite, actually. I went to, people always think, well, in Europe, universities teach these things better or differently, but unfortunately it's kind of very much similar all over, at least the countries that I know. So their landscape architecture is taught essentially without the teaching the knowledge of plants, and ecology is often kind of pushed to the sidelines. It's more about materials, space making, all of these things, and carbon sequestration maybe now, but diversity, at least when I did my training there, was not as much the focus. I went to the University of Munich because it was a little bit better there. Some of you may know that the Hansen and Stahl, for example, and many of the plant community-based design systems were developed at that university. So some of the system thinkers and folks who believe that landscape architecture has to be a lot more than space making and decoration. They were at that university. So we did have some classes there that focus more on ecology. One of my favorite ones, for example, was urban ecology. And one of the exercises was to essentially look at a piece of land, even if it's a sidewalk, and fast forward, predict what kind of plants would grow there in 10, 50, 100 years. So it was taught a little bit, but certainly not to the point that already set me on my track to want more. I think that came later. So through Wolfgang Oehmer, I learned a lot of traditional horticulture, bigger block massing. Some of you may know that American garden style or New American garden style, where often single species blocks, sometimes by the not just tens of species but thousands of species were used. And I think personally this is all really appealing, but many of these plantings just seem to have a lack of life and a lack of persistence, and seem to be disconnected from how plants associate with one another in more autonomous, wilder systems. So to me, it almost felt like, a couple of years into my career, like we're missing something here. Why do so many well-intended designs just kind of crumble and fall apart after a few years? Many of them, the second you plant them, they kind of start to dissolve and, eventually become huge spaces of mulch or eventually turf again. And they often just seem to have a fraction of the ecological, buzzing around them, all the insects, the birds, everything. So in a world today where we've lost a lot of natural areas, the insect apocalypse has happened. When you go out and you see a fraction of the birds, right? It's happened. It's an ecological disaster, and I honestly feel that our profession can and must do more than just decorate spaces. And I think that's what really set us as a firm on our track to demand more and to look for opportunities for ecological intensification everywhere, even in the most stylized and urban constrained spaces, including green infrastructure, to really pack as much life, diversity, abundance really into all of these opportunities that we as a profession can control. So, and that really creates a hybrid system that still creates spaces that are for people. We're not in the business of restoration. There are many people who do that a lot better than us. We are in the business of landscape architecture, space making, garden making, and reconnecting people with these wild spaces is essential to our work. And because of that, the designs we create have to relate to people emotionally. So, we can do a certain amount of ecological, intensification and all that. But at the same time, it has to have this balance and needs to look good. It needs to get under your skin and evoke something that, we remember, something that right now we have to drive really far to have that kind of experience in some kind of, natural park, for example. But bringing that emotional content into cities, places where we live, work, relax, and play, that's really the goal, so that more people have access to that on a regular basis, because we need it. And the shifting baseline syndrome makes us get used to a lot of things, declining levels of ecological diversity and green and lushness every year. But it doesn't mean that our physical and emotional need for these what natural spaces give us disappears. We still need that as healthy human beings. So we're trying to, in our projects, really pack in as much of this function and as much beauty and joy as possible, and make these places shine with that.
Yeah,
So in
that's
many
a
ways,
lot
they're
there. No, that's
botanical
some really,
fantasies. Yeah.
really good stuff there. And
Uh-huh.
one of the take homes on that, I think, is that it's more than just aesthetics. Yes,
Mhm.
and it needs to look good, but there's all these other things that these plants and the design that they're in can bring to us, to our communities. So with some of the clientele you're working with, are they also looking at as some of these other attributes? You mentioned green infrastructure. You briefly touched upon, I think, the warming climate. When you were talking about German forest, are you working with anyone that's looking at designs that are going to cool some of these cities, some of these heat islands down a bit, or or is that not really on anyone's radar a great extent yet?
That's a great question, Tom. And I can assure you it's on almost every one of our clients' radar, because we
Okay.
all feel that, this is that's not climate, that's weather, right? And that's one of the things that every client or people who use the spaces that we help build feel on a daily basis. So right now we're designing several spaces in Manhattan, for example, including a Bobby Wagner walk that goes alongside the eastern edge of Manhattan, and shading is a key factor of that. So we're again trying to get as much space as possible from engineers and infrastructure to really put the maximum of trees into these systems, and be creative in what kind of trees are now appropriate for that. Many parks you just have simple type of canopy tree, often oaks or maples, but there are a lot of other tree typologies that are often much more resilient to these ultra urban or even coastal areas that experience coastal flooding, or just the pressures of lower Manhattan use, right? Lots of bicycles and people and dogs. So we really use our knowledge and the knowledge of the people that we work with, all of the nursery folks and naturalists that know these communities way better than we do, to bring innovative new types of plants into these spaces where we need their functions or their resilience to do better than we've done in the past. So we're really thinking outside of the box here, and going in our heads to really difficult areas in natural settings, and not only coastal sand dunes, but serpentine barrens and other places, and trying to find species that are pre-adapted to the kinds of conditions that we are often faced with in our projects. And that includes stormwater infrastructure and green roofs and the whole 9 yards. So working very closely with our industry partners is a huge part of that, because quite honestly, not all of the species that we need are in production yet. It's really frustrating sometimes how a lot of growers are still very much focusing on what used to be our toolbox, the pretty, the easy grower friendly species that ship well. But we now need a whole different set of survivors. And, where in the past we were often afraid of growing really aggressive species like mountain mint or northern sea oats and stuff like that, now actually become a real asset to a lot of the work we do, not only because they are survivors, no matter what the contractors do, right? But also because they pack all of this ecological function in that we so desperately need.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
you mentioned mountain mint, and you were
mhm.
instrumental in the design of the pollinator garden at Penn State. Is that correct?
Yeah, we were part of the team with
Yeah.
Emmanuel Didi, a really amazing landscape designer out of Fort Collins, as well as Lake Phyto and a bunch of other amazing folks. We had the privilege of being a
Well,
part
the
of this
reason I
team.
asked that is you mentioned
Mhm.
mountain mint, and every time I go on to the grounds of the Arboretum up at Penn State, there are people flocked around that mountain mint because of
Yeah.
all the activity. And I'm not talking about the human activity, but there's
Mhm.
just the buzzing, the pollinators that are coming and going. People just stand there and just watch it. This huge
Yeah.
expanse of this mountain mint. So I mean, that was a good add to
Thank
that
you.
pollinator
Yeah.
garden.
Yeah, Harlan Patch and the whole Center for Pollinator Research, they've been really helpful in guiding us towards these high-performing species, because not all native plants are created equal. In fact, there are a lot of native plants, and ferns is just one example, that don't have many relationships with pollinators, for example.
Yeah.
In fact, it's amazing how old this category of plants is, and yet almost nothing eats them. Yeah? So with that, we were able to really fill that garden, being the pollinator garden. Again, it wasn't enough just to rely on anecdotal evidence, where, we saw pollinators in, our garden walks or nature walks, but to really look at the science and see how many different species of the many different categories of pollinators are visited by not a genus, but very specific species and sometimes subspecies and cultivars of plants, and then use them as the main component of the garden. That is, we kind of almost flipped the process upside down and looked at what species we needed to have to make sure that this garden, you can hear it from a mile away, right? The
Yeah.
buzzing
Yeah.
before we designed it. So that was really a unique approach, and in many ways, as a firm, we've learned a lot, and we now do that to a lot of other projects as well, where we know, like the mountain mint, Tom, that you just mentioned, that's a staple. I mean, there are many different species of mountain mint,
Mhm.
right? So we would always select the ones that are most appropriate for the context. But they've become huge staples of our designs, and often we kind of make them to set them at the beginning of the design process, and then sometimes the whole aesthetic kind of evolves around that, so they
Hmm.
can be included. Mhm.
I have
It's
a
an
couple of questions.
it's
Oh, sorry.
humbling profession. Like with every project, there's new tools and new things that we learn, and it's just been a really exciting journey.
I have a couple of questions about your business. How many people do you have on staff?
Yeah, this is really, we're very small. We're only about 4 people,
Hmm.
but we were very productive, and very often we work with other landscape architecture and engineering firms, and we plug into bigger teams. Like we often lead our own projects, but we're also very collaborative, where we plug in and become the horticultural specialists or the folks designing land management plans for bigger, estates, for example, or bigger farm properties or farm garden conversions. So we work in many different ways with people. So it's small, but that means we can focus on what we do well.
And this is not a fair
Mhm.
question because there's too many variables that can impact this, but what is the length of time for like the development of one of the projects you're
Mhm.
working on? I mean, I understand that
Mhm.
size and how many other people are involved impacts that, but
Yeah.
is there kind of like a ballpark figure from kind of like your
Mhm.
basic design start to completion where all the plants are in?
Yeah, I wish, but unfortunately, it's not. We're not in the business of instant garden making. I think that's just a lie. We're in the business of having adventures with our clients and kind of going through this phase of making something together. It's a journey. So we have clients that have been with us for 7 years now and ongoing. So we're really looking for these long-term relationships. We don't always get it. There's some projects that are done after 2 years or 3 years. But for many, we're trying, especially if land management is part of the scope, trying to provide guidance long before installation and initial establishment, because it really does take a very educated, smart approach to garden care or nurturing, to make it efficient and make sure that this little teenager grows into, you know, a really good looking adult. So landscapes take a little bit longer to get there. Yeah, so I can't tell you that, but we're definitely, long-term relationships are what matter to us. And a big part of what we design are not just the, you know, initial concept design and installation plans, but we develop very practical hands-on land management tools, even for garden scale projects, that become like a guiding set of principles and you know, planning tools that our clients can use on a daily basis to nurture this garden. Because maintenance is really so important, and it often has to be just as innovative as the design itself to work, right? The two of them, they go hand in hand. There are certain things that require building a slightly different kind of institutional memory often, to make sure that these systems are cared for correctly. So for instance, as one example, many of our gardens, if not all of them, they use plants as the mulch. They're not systems where you have this ocean of mulch and then you furnish that with plants like individual objects or like, you know, museum pieces in a gallery. So the plants are really designed to be that ground cover, to knit together over time and to function as a system. Yeah, so where they interact with one another, design plant community. And how complex or simple that is really depends on the project. If we have a public garden project with amazing gardeners, it's very complex. If we do, you know, an urban stormwater system, it's got to be bulletproof and it's less complex. Yeah, so that folks with these different varying skill levels can know what to do with it and can take care of it with how they know how to take care of it. But you know, these systems don't require mulch. And it's so ingrained to mulch a landscape here in the US every spring or every other spring that often it requires more than just writing a specification to make sure that doesn't happen, because it would actually completely smother the design plan community in many of our designs. So these practical hands-on toolkits we develop are there to essentially, so they almost like a memory keeper to make sure that the knowledge of how to take care of that doesn't get lost over time, but is passed on to the people who maintain and manage these gardens. So the traditional maintenance manual often, you know, disappears or it collects dust on a shelf somewhere and nobody remembers it exists.
Yeah.
This is why we're creating these kinds of tools that are either hanging on the office wall in the maintenance office or are practical things you use every single day to build a different, more innovative institutional memory and make sure that these systems are cared for the right way.
So
I hope this makes sense.
No,
Yeah.
this is good stuff. This is good stuff. Hey, going back to a comment you made earlier, talked about ferns and being native, and surprisingly not much eats them, right? You alluded to something like that. Here in the Mid-Atlantic region, we've got a big problem with deer. And, you know, we always get these requests or these asks, you know, what can I plant and how to, you know, deal with these deer on the intrusion into a landscape. As you do some of these designs for larger, you know, holdings, designs, is that something you have to take into consideration at all? Or are these places fenced in and you can do what you want?
Yeah, I wish, but most of these places are not fenced in. It's just not feasible either to build it or to maintain a mile-long deer fence. You know, something always falls on them, or the deer even kind of knock them over. So yeah, so that's a huge challenge with many projects. And in the more urban projects, where we don't have deer, we have geese, we have rabbits, we have all kinds of other wildlife. So it's never perfect, yeah. And there are almost no places where we have the luxury of using all the botanical divas you know. So it often needs to be super resilient. And there are many little techniques we use to make it less palatable to deer. So sometimes it just really means that we can't have any of the species that they eat right away.
Okay.
Or in projects with extremely high pressure, where it's not only about the eating, but also about the rubbing, we have to reduce the shrub layer, because it looks awful to have every single shrub fenced in forever to keep the deer from eating them. So we really need to think about then a tree system or systems with lots of mountain mint in it, right? That they don't eat. Something that can hold up on its own. Initially, in these higher deer pressure kind of conditions, our contractors will apply deer repellents because apparently when plants come out of nurseries, they're especially tasty. So we gotta give them some time to acclimate and let the leaves, get a little bit more bitter before that can be reduced. So generally, we try to design so that these plantings require the least amount of human life support, so that when a spraying gets skipped or we get a rain right after a spraying, it's not gone instantly. And that often means that we just have to be realistic, and there's certain things we can't include, or we include it in strategic ways where the deer it's too thick and they can't get to it. But it's absolutely a consideration of, I would say, the majority of our projects.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. On our farm, my husband and I, we're just now negotiating with some additional hunters to help us manage that population better, because it's really sad to see what it does to natural forest regeneration and some of the few orchid populations and other things that we still have in our woods, and we can't fence it all in. So yeah.
What do you find is the most challenging part of your profession? What triggered me to think about that was, you were mentioning, like the management plans for the projects that, you're designing. And it just made me think that, where I usually see that fail is, people will put in like small rain gardens, a municipality or a school district, and it might actually look fairly decent, with the volume of plant material they put in. But then there's no management plan, and a couple of years down the road, it's just been overtaken by usually grass or some other weedy plant, and it's destroyed. So I didn't know if that was a major issue for you.
Tim, I think this is one of the things I'm most concerned about, actually. I think with every single meadow or rain garden that fails, it becomes harder for all of us to convince future clients to do this. It's a huge challenge because it's really difficult to restore that trust into ecologically, better planting if it's failed once for a client. I still believe that there are just too many rain gardens and pollinator gardens and you name it, going up that could be designed better, but that are not. Where either little knowledge is dangerous, or the whole what that planting needs hasn't been carefully and strategically designed, and often the funding runs out after installation. And I really think that hurts all of us who are trying to do better and show that ecological, more intense planting does not have to look messy and weedy at all. In fact, it can be highly attractive and totally suitable for the most highly visible spaces in urban or even suburban areas. It's just making it really hard for us to then rebuild that trust. And there are a lot of folks who are still promising no-mow or meadow solutions as the solution to it all. And then look at it. Look at this 10-foot tall beast with autumn olive and roses popping up everywhere. And clients being completely disappointed. And you get to the point where they don't ever want to hear the word meadow again, because it wasn't promised to them that is what happened, or that it would require the kind of care that meadows require. They're the holy grail of planting design. They're really, really tricky to do right. So that's where, and this is one of the reasons why Thomas and I wrote this book now quite a while ago, to give people more tools and decide what types of planting methods make sense in what context. So it's not just block planting. There are many ways of mingling plants with one another in design systems that are inspired by and educated by how plants associate with one another in natural systems. And these kinds of approaches are essential to, for example, meadow making, even if it's a highly stylized meadow. And these are not just living in the realm of art. Many of these systems are built on very solid scientific foundations that have analyzed and still analyze how plants interact with one another, what their longevity and behavior is, either alone or with companion species. And that kind of geekiness is what's often required to build more stable, nothing's ever 100% stable, but more stable planting systems that are especially suitable to these ecological expressions. So we geek out over this. Yeah.
I can't let you say that without promoting your book,
Oh,
Planting in a Post-Wild World. I mean, for our listeners who really want to, if they have no exposure to this sort of, and I'm going to put this in quotes, like landscaping, this horticultural world, it's a fantastic resource. That you mentioned meadows a couple of times, so again, I just like to know kind of like how businesses work, since I don't own or run a business. So for your meadow projects, as part of the management for them, do you have like prescribed burns into the management for them?
We do where we can. Unfortunately, not all of our clients can do it because of where they are. We have some who are still working on permitting and really close, and then we have others who are already doing that. And I personally, my husband and I, we set our entire backyard on fire almost every spring. So we're big believers in that. And that was a whole different learning curve. Many European meadow systems are not fire ecologies, but here in the United States they are. And it's really amazing to see what that does for how plants, how these communities work, and how that changes the dynamism within seeded or planted or mixed meadow kind of systems. But yeah, this is one of the first questions we ask when we do meadow projects, or even woodland projects. You don't only burn meadows; woodland understories can also be burned, and it's just as rejuvenating for different woodland communities. So we ask that question right away, and we get in touch with fire experts in that region and see, what is the process? Is this something we can already do, or is it something that, is possible in the future? And then the entire meadow system would be designed around this factor. If it is a mowed system or if it is a occasionally burned system, it really changes the plant species composition, and it changes the whole management approach to it. So if it's a mowed system, it would be a very different type of meadow. And yes, we even have a few clients now who are grazing as well as another option. So there's many different ways of making meadows. And just to kind of circle back to some of my past, I was raised on a farm in Eastern Germany, and I remember absolutely stunning 4-bridge meadows that were cow pastures with a couple of goats mixed into the grazing cycle. So it's by no means this pristine kind of prairie system that so many people envision when they hear meadow. Meadow are cultural products, and management of meadows can make them really beautiful if it's thoughtful and if it's regular, because a regular mowing or grazing or burning schedule allows species to fall within these cracks, right, where their opportunities are, either between mow cycles or burn cycles. And where these opportunities are, that's exactly where these sweet spots are for different types of plant communities, so they can thrive. So they need consistency. That's important. So you can build actual populations of plants within a set management action framework. And if you have that and kind of sort these species that fit whatever pattern it is, that's when you're starting to have the beginnings of a young meadow. And then over years, it will evolve into something more stable with its own ecological memory.
You mentioned your oh, go ahead, Tim.
Oh, sorry, Tom. Do you think most of your clients come to you because they have some knowledge or an interest in this fascinating ecological system that could be put into whatever piece of land that they have, or are they still kind of, I'll use the phrase like old fashioned, where they've heard about you and your company, and they're still more like on the aesthetics end of like landscape design, and like they primarily want that, but oh, if there's an ecological benefit, well, that's fantastic too. I don't know how people get into like some of the very
Yeah.
specific projects that you make.
I think the people who come to us want both. Like I said earlier, it's not just about restoration, it's not just decoration. It's really that sweet spot. So most folks today are somewhat educated about the ecological crisis, and they understand that, with the land you own, you have a little bit of a responsibility as well. So there's that. But also gardeners, we enjoy life in a garden, right? So people who want planting systems usually want something that gives them a little bit more than just, color contrast or textures, right? So you want to see the occasional butterfly or something, you discover something. And many of them have kids, right? Something that reconnects and gets them outside so they're not staring at screens all the time. So I think our clients are really that sweet spot of how can you have all that adventure and curiosity and just the sense of wonder aspect, but still have a garden that your neighbors will like too, right? Or your mother-in-law will like too. And it's not kicking you out of the community or the people come over and mow your yard for you, right?
Yeah.
So I know
Yeah.
these things all happen. So it's really that sweet spot where people want both. And I think there's a new generation a little bit too of people buying homes now. You folks who grew up with recycling and just being a little bit more in tune with the ecologies, and I think that's really exciting. But we have the whole age span of clients. I think most of them want a little bit more than just the traditional. And I honestly think working in a garden or caring for it is such an important balance now to the busy life we all live, right? Being inside in front of a desk, in front of a computer, maybe not the two of you, but many others, right? So that this complete no maintenance, no care,
Mm.
don't touch it kind of system, I don't see that being as popular anymore. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we feel that a lot more of our clients actually want to be more hands-on because they feel it's good for them and want to have something to nurture and take care of and something that then gives something back, right? So I feel like this maybe the tide is shifting a little bit, and that's kind of many of the clients come to us yeah, who
I think it is
definitely in that
shifting.
category. Yeah.
I think it is shifting a little bit, but you still have a good number of
Hmm.
folks out there that like this idea of
Hmm.
low maintenance or no maintenance, and
Hmm.
they're kind of sold on that concept. And yeah, maybe that's
Yeah.
where that whole thing with mulch volcanoes comes from, Tim. We see those in the landscapes around Pennsylvania.
Mm.
I
So
still
Yeah.
remember time I gave a presentation up at your winter meeting probably about 5 or so years ago, and I was talking about like I think it was on like beneficial insects, and I used the picture of Connie Schmotzer's front yard, who was the master gardener
yeah,
coordinator at York, and how her and her husband had completely redesigned it with natives, and it kind of has that. I mean, they had things within beds, but it has a more of like a wild
yep,
look to it. And one of the guys in the audience was just like, "Why would you want your yard to look like that?"
exactly. Yeah,
Mhm.
so you still have some of that
Yeah.
around. So, Claudia, you mentioned your background coming from East Germany and your experience there. And earlier on in this conversation, you had talked about your exposure to some of these American natives that really piqued your interest and kind of allowed you to explore your horticulture, interests. What were the couple of those natives that really got the ball rolling for you? I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, so phlox, for example, phlox is one of the hardest garden plants in Europe. It's in every front yard. You would think it's native there. It's not. It's an American native. That, as well as Rudbeckias, Echinacеas, panicums, big tall grasses.
Okay.
Europe has almost no warm seas grasses that I know of that have ornamental value like that. So yeah, all these Acastache, my goodness, Amazonias,
Mm-hmm.
where to start, right?
Oh no,
Many of
there's a lot of
them.
great ones. I was just
Yeah,
curious to see which ones
these are
kicked
some
off
of the
your
ones that
interest.
are a staple. I don't think you can drive far from any European airport out into anywhere you go without seeing American native plants. Yeah. And they do really well there. I think it's a bit of a myth that they say, plant more natives because they're super adapted to your local conditions. and they will do better there than exotic species. Well, I can tell you that American native plants look amazing in Europe without any natural predators, or very few. So yeah. Yeah. But I think it's important to think, when we design, yes, we're aware of what's native and we know what is invasive, and we take that extremely seriously. But for us, we also look a lot at ecological value. We really follow the publications from many different universities and centers who do this, like Penn State does extensively on a regular basis, to learn more about what out of all these cultivars, for example, is the most high performing, and Mount Cuba's research on that is incredibly important. That guides our decisions where the information is available. It's not available everywhere, and it's still, needs a lot of more research, but we're trying to make more educated decisions as designers. So out of all these choices we have, we can squeeze the most function into any kind of system.
Yeah, I think it's important for people to know that, whether they only have like 100 square feet in their backyard or they have acres, that they can convert it to, either exclusively or primarily like native plants to try to, do their contribution to help with this loss of habitat, the influx of invasive, plant species, how they've disrupted ecosystems, that people can really make a difference if they know that they can. Like the work that you're doing is promoting that.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful thing when it works. My goodness. I mean, I still have my peonies in my garden and I'm not going to dig them up, but I have all of these other things with them and it is humming. It's a beautiful thing when you walk outside and you're greeted by all of this life that you put there. It's just magical.
Tim had mentioned invasives, and we have a lot of invasives here in the U.S. that are coming from Asia and other parts of the world. Over in Germany, we're always asked this question at our winter meetings when we talk about invasives. People want to know, are there any American plants that are invasive elsewhere? So like over in Germany or Europe, are there a couple are there a couple American plants, U.S. plants that have kind of run amok over there?
There are thousands, Tom. It works both ways.
Okay. Well, I know it does. I know, but when people ask that question, I don't have any good examples to give because I sadly say I've never been to Germany or Europe.
Okay, well, I can give you some. Goldenrods, for example, are like along every single train corridor. You will see different species of American goldenrods blooming their little hearts out and covered in bees, I should say, right? So they're everywhere. And I think Onathera is one of the big winners too. There are a couple of different species that went over early in history. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Onathera is now actually evolving into completely new species over there because they're disconnected from the plants, here where they came from. So it's kind of setting them off on a really exciting new evolutionary adventures. And
yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, it works both ways. I mean, I saw Native American Asclepia syriaca in Ukraine and China. It's really a global world. It goes both ways. Yeah. Yes.
Well, we're coming up on the end of our time. And we like to ask our guests the same question here at the end. What do you like to do when you have free time, if you have any free time? Like, what are some of your hobbies?
Oh gosh, yeah. So my hobbies, well, my husband and I, we own a farm in northern Baltimore County, and when I'm not actually designing it, I'm doing what I'm preaching. So we're out there caring for our prairies and actively managing some of the worst invasive in our woodlands, planting new trees to ecologically enrich that. We're not people who sit in front of TVs. We slip into our work clothes and get a lot of pleasure out of doing all this. And in a way, it's our living lab. So doing it and having this insanely close relationship with the land and all the different populations of species really connects us and teaches us things that we can then apply in our clients' projects. So I love nothing more than turning my computer off and getting out there with, a spade or whatever that needs to happen, and actually doing that kind of work. To seeing the species coming back, not only insects, but even bird species and all of these rewards that are there if you pay attention, it's a beautiful thing and it rejuvenates us. So that's what we do.
Well, thank you so much, Claudia, for
Mhm.
joining us here this afternoon. It was really great getting a chance to talk and to see you again. And hopefully, your business will keep increasing as far as clients go, because we really do need this type of these ecosystems to replace what we're destroying.
Mhm. Thank you, Tim and Tom. It's been a real pleasure to chat with you, and thanks again for having me on the program.
Yes, thank
Absolutely.
you. That was great.